I'm Sarah Lambert. I'm the Vice President of Programs and Community Investment here at the Foundation. So I oversee all of our grant making processes, our charitable distributions, community initiatives, et cetera, other duties as assigned. I just celebrated my 9th anniversary here, so I've been doing this for a while. Just to go over the agenda for this morning, or the Zoom, I don't transfers. There, Zoom. So just so everybody's aware, we are going to ask everyone to stay muted during the presentation, so just to eliminate background noise. And you can wave using reactions to ask a question between the presenters, or use the chat box to ask questions. We'll kind of be keeping an eye on that and throw those in as we can. We'll also have a opportunity to ask questions at the end as well. So the way the program is going to flow today, it'll look pretty familiar for those of you who've attended this event before. I'm going to do a brief overview of our grant making philosophies just to set the tone for the day. And then Jennifer Smith, our engagement director, will talk about kind of our grant making process and how we generate our revenues and things like that. Where does the money come from? I'm going to talk about the biggest change to the program this year, which is adjustments to the focus area. And then James Patterson, our senior program director, will talk about the application itself. And Lisa DeLang will actually do a physical walkthrough of the program, or of the web portal. We'll also have a couple other opportunities we want to mention, and then have time for questions. So. But don't hesitate to throw anything into the chat if it comes up during the presentation. Okay. All right, so again, just to set the tone for today, I want to remind everybody of our grant making philosophies. So this is a document that we've been working on for many years. It's a living document. It changes every time, but it's based on our ideas of how we think grant making should occur. So what are the best practices? How do we approach grant making in a way that we find to be ethical and effective? So the first is we respect our applicants as experts in their fields. If you're the ones who do your jobs every day, you say you need something, we're going to trust that you need something. We respect our advisors, or as we also refer to them as reviewers. It's very important to the foundation that everyone who is involved, or that the community is driving the way the community's dollars are being spent. So we have a team of over 80 volunteers who help us make these funding decisions. Partial funding should only be awarded with caution. We don't want to make your lives harder by giving you $10,000 with a $15,000 grant. That's just me capping you, and that's not helpful to anyone. So we do push our volunteers or push our reviewers to make the hard decisions rather than sprinkle fairy dust, which, believe me, many want to do. We also believe that funding indirect costs is the right thing to do. So we actually ask you to add that 15% into your total budget. It's a line item on your budget. Please go back and actually add that into the total amount. We want you to take that money because you need to buy things like toilet paper and insurance. So just take it. Don't think that you're being, a good grant writer by not adding in that 15%. Don't do that. We believe that competent, trained, and adequately compensated staff are essential for successful programs and healthy organizations. One of my least favorite comments is, well, why don't we just get volunteers to do it? That's not okay. The work that you all are doing is highly skilled and requires a strong experience and education, and you should be compensated for that. Nonprofits rely on grant funding for program sustainability. Totally okay if you come back and say, this grant funding is how we fund this, because that is how the system works. And transparency is fundamental. And that's really more on our end. We take every effort to try and be clear about how decisions are made, where our money is flowing from, what the community's needs are, and because we don't want you to have to guess or try and game the system or anything like that. This is a process that everyone should be working from the same set of information for. So, if you really want to go deep, please feel free to check out our website. There is a video of the philosophies on there. but we just want to make sure that everybody understands kind of what the playing field is here. All right, and I'm going to hand it off to Jen.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Smith. I'm the Engagement Director here at the Foundation, and I'm starting off my section by giving you a high-level overview of grants from last year, so you have a sense of what was awarded, what the average grant size looks like, and what to kind of expect a general idea of what we'll be awarding this year. The allocations this year are very, very similar, so last year, between new and some multi-year renewed requests, we awarded over $1.7 million. And the average grant size amongst all of the focus areas was just under $21,000. So that doesn't mean that you have to ask for exactly $21,000, nor does it mean that the number of grants will be distributed just like this amongst the focus areas, but just to give you a sense of what last year looked like, and this usually doesn't change like dramatically year over year. So to give you a sense of where to expect awards to look like in 2024. The rest of my section, I'm going to really give a very high level overview of sort of where does the money come from to award these grants. This question was asked at last year's Grantseekers meeting, and I don't remember who asked it, but whoever you are, know that question has stuck in my brain for literally 12 months. And I did my best to answer it on the fly last year. We were just sort of taken aback because no one has ever asked that question like really directly, at least not in any meeting that I've been in. And it's not that it's secret, it's just that we aren't ever really asked, and we probably don't talk about it enough. So what you see here is a flowchart of our assets under management, all the different types of funds that we manage here at the Foundation, and what happens with those funds, where the distributions from them go. And I think really what was implied by that question was, how does CFNIL cover its costs? Like, where is our operating budget coming from? And the big part of that answer is fees that are charged to the endowments that we manage. The fees are not secret. They are posted out on our website. We talk about them with folks who want to come in and start a fund, and anyone who asks. These are the fees that are charged to the different types of endowments and different types of funds that we manage. I'm not going to read every word on this slide. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can visit our website and check it out. But just know that that's where our operating budget comes from, and at least 90% of it. The other 10% is covered by unrestricted gifts. You should know that when we receive an unrestricted gift, when someone just writes a check and it says CFNIL in the to line, we have a policy that those gifts are split 80-20. 80% of the gift goes right into grant making programs, 20% goes into our operating endowment. So even unrestricted gifts, 80% of that is going back out in grant making programs to the community. And we also do solicit sponsorships to help pay for some of the events that we manage. At this time, none of our events are fundraisers. They are like Excalibur and Excelsior, which is a free event. We're excited to help present that to the community. But we do, our board would not be happy with us if we cover the entire cost of that event out of our operating budget. So we do solicit some sponsorships. But back to the question about where the money comes from to award these grants and these assets under management. So our funds have different sort of categories. Some have donor restrictions that they must always go to support whatever sort of activity in the community or whichever organization. Some of them do not have restrictions, and those are managed through our grant making, competitive grant making, and non-competitive grant making programs and things like that. And just to give you a sense of where we stand today, or at least as of the end of our Q1, which was March 31st, our total assets right now are just under $140 million. 95% of those are permanently endowed, which means we will not touch the principal. They will be here to distribute every year in perpetuity for the community. 70% of those are donor restricted, either by the fund type or a fund purpose, or sometimes both. 15% of them are unrestricted. They may be for grant making, unrestricted grant making dollars, or unrestricted and they cover our operating costs. 14% of those funds are agency funds. We hold an endowment that was created by an agency for that agency, and 1% are held in trust. Last year, we distributed between $4.5 and $5 million, and you can see how that's broken down. So community grants is a big chunk of that, but lots of other dollars going out the door through donor designated funds, donor advised funds, through scholarships, and also back out to agencies who hold endowments with us. So that's the highlight of those of where the money comes from. How do we support community grants? And yeah, just so we answer any of those questions. If you have further questions about that, again, none of this is a secret, but we probably don't talk about it enough or clearly enough. Amongst all of those funds are a number of them that you see up here on the screen, and some of the names that you see on the screen might be familiar to you if you've worked in the community for some time. These are people or entities that created funds here at the foundation, and they intend for those dollars to go out through our grant making processes, and all of these funds feed into community grants. So when you get your grant award letter and it has the name of a fund in there, one of these funds that's on this screen, that's our way of saying thank you to those folks, and always invite you to join us in thanking these folks as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about 3 specific funds that their purpose is a field of interest. They are awarded through community grants in 3 specific focus areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these are programs that have a more narrow focus than a lot of our others. So we just want to make sure that everyone is aware that these dollars are available. You don't need to do anything else other than apply to community grants in that focus area. It's something that we handle on the back end, but one of the programs that always struggles to find the exact right fit is the United Cerebral Palsy of Black Hawk Region Fund. Those dollars are intended to support services to persons with developmental disabilities, especially activities that promote inclusion. So the idea there is it's not about hosting an event specifically for individuals with disabilities, but to host an event and make sure that it's accessible to individuals with disabilities. So that's a nuance there. We also have the John W. Lundeen Historical Preservation Fund, which celebrates the region's history and preserves historical integrity. And those dollars are distributed through arts and humanities. And then the Margaret K. Aldine Christian Ministry Fund, which is for basic needs. It provides food, housing, and medical needs to the poor, primarily through organizations with a Christian emphasis. So we make many, many awards to organizations that have a religious background, but James will go into this in a little bit more detail later, but we just ask that that it's not for a religious purpose, it's for the human services purpose. All right. So speaking of focus areas, this is the biggest change that we enacted this year. So for those of you who have been around this community for a while, you may remember that about 10 years ago, we collapsed all of our grant making processes and all of our grant making programs into one big program, community grants. A big part of that was administrative. It's easier for us to handle one big process than a bunch of little tiny processes. But it also allows us to combine dollars so that we can make bigger grants, we can take bigger swings. So when we did that, we created 6 different focus areas that allowed us to manage the dollars in a way that made sense. We have a saying around here that everything loses to milk for babies, despite the fact that we fully believe that arts programs and health programs and education programs are equally valuable and need to be funded, deserve to be funded. If you put them head to head with milk for babies, it's really hard to not always choose the babies. So we separate them. They aren't in the same pools of money. So everyone applies to a specific focus area based on the purpose of their project, program, or event. So since we did this 10 years ago, it's time to zhuzh it up a little bit, to evaluate what we were doing, make sure that it was clear and that it matched the needs of the community and our current priorities as a community. So there were some changes were very minor and some were pretty wholesale. So these first 2 were the smallest changes. With arts and humanities, we primarily just added in the word crafts because we wanted to make sure that was clear. And then we can maintain the Lundin Historical Society criteria as well. In health, we added in more of an emphasis on general wellness and public health, not just research and things. But this is an example of where we really needed to make sure that we were saying being explicit and saying the inside part out loud. We had always assumed that things like mental health fell under health, but we never actually said that. Mental health did not make an appearance in any focus area that we had. So it was time to add that back in. So we explicitly state that mental health falls under health. And this is something that we found across the board. So moving on to slightly more complicated changes, youth and families. This is an area that really is meant to be focused on systemic, long-term change. So it includes providing pathways to self-sufficiency for individuals and families. It helps to strengthen families by providing access to vital services, caregiver education, and other support. And supporting the emotional, physical, social, and character development of youth through mentorship, life skills training, and other programming. So this is really things that are not meant to be, they're not Band-Aids, they are meant to create long-term change. Sustainable communities has always been our hardest to define category. But the way we look at it is really about the environment around you in all definitions. So the first is promoting economic activity, strong neighborhoods, and public safety. So that's the community around you, your communities and environment. Preserving and enhancing our community's built environment and ensuring quality, affordable, and permanent housing. So the built environment, the actual physical development around you. Preserving our natural environment and increasing the region's understanding and appreciation of the environment, including animal welfare. So that's the environment, the natural environment around you. And then this is the new one, increasing the capacity and infrastructure of our nonprofit and public sector. So that's your work environment, the ability to affect change. This is where that would fall. So again, if you ever have any questions, give us a call, specifically Lisa, and she will help you. It is always intended to be a permeable process. Like it's something that you don't need to stress over if there are many things that don't fall exactly into a specific bucket. And so we just do our best. And if we find that something isn't in the right spot, we will. All right, and the next two are education buckets. So these are, when we relaunched the community grants program, we also launched an education works initiative. So that was our strategic grant making where we were trying to put a lot of dollars into a single area. That was divided into two categories, career pathways and complementary education. And with career pathways, that was a really big emphasis in the community. And to some extent, we did it. Those pathways exist. Those systems have been built. So it's time to think a little more globally about how we're helping build those systems outside of necessarily not just the school system. And Comp Ed is really about academic focus. So with career pathways, we're promoting post-secondary readiness and attainment through academic support, mentorship, and soft skill development. Increasing student access to and engagement with career information and their related pathways, defining the region's workforce needs, and developing a skilled workforce. So that's all of those apprentice programs and things like that. And fostering collaboration among educators, employers, and the workforce and economic development entities. But under Comp Ed, that's really focused on strengthening educational opportunities for all ages within the region. So that's increasing the capacity and infrastructure and educational quality of schools and school-through programs, providing learning hours and reinforcing classroom instruction, and supporting before and after summer school and enrichment programs. So the key here is that academic focused. So if you have a youth program and a summer program that's really about and providing learning opportunities, this is where it should fall. If it's more about art or the environment, it should go in arts and humanities or sustainable communities. This is truly academics. Okay, and then finally, the biggest change is human services. This used to be one bucket. And actually, we have been operating like this for several years. We made an administrative change and split the communities into two because we had too many applications in this area. So now we are codifying that, making them two separate committees. The first is basic needs and compassionate support, and this truly is focused on alleviating suffering. This is immediate needs, helping people in crisis. One important distinction here is the housing and temporary shelter. Temporary shelter should go here. So things like, rapid rehousing programs, homeless shelters, they go here. Long-term housing opportunities like Habitat for Humanity, those go under human or sustainable communities because those are true permanent solutions. Equity, dignity, and respect is the other focus area. So this is really emphasizing promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within the region, and supporting, protecting, and enhancing the lives of underrepresented and vulnerable or exploited populations. So these are programs for folks with disabilities, older adults, kids in the foster system, things like that. So if you have any questions on this one in particular, please let us know. But the general gist is the buckets are the same, the umbrellas are the same, they are just more specific and will hopefully allow everyone involved in the process to be more clear about what we're trying to achieve. In particular, we're hoping this will help the reviewers to really look at, here are our goals. So we will be looking at this process again. It's going to be an iterative process that will take several years. The goal that ultimately it will reflect the needs of the community overall and the trends in the sector. So we will be, as always, looking for feedback on this after the cycle. So, all right, and now James is going to actually talk about the important stuff.
Maybe. All right, I started off muted, but I'm no longer muted. So yes, James Patterson, Senior Program Director here at the Community Foundation, and I'm going to talk about the process of community grants. First thing I want to talk about is the resources that are available to you, and specifically, there's a lot of resources right on our website that you have that you can look over to help you do this process. The first page that you really want to go to is our community grants page. That's the first one listed up there. That will give you the guidelines. It has the focus areas that Sarah just described right there for your use. And it has all the technical details, some of which we'll go over today, but there's a lot more information in there, and it would always encourage you to start there first to take a look at that. Now, there's other pages on the website that can be very helpful to you as well. As a grant seeker, there's an entire page that has to do with grant seeking. And then we have an entire page that has to do with current grantees. And we'll go to the next slide and look at some of the specific things that are out there. And as it relates to the website, you'll find on the grant seekers resources, you'll find a sample budget and budget narrative, which can be very helpful. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. You'll find the PDF version of the application also there. You'll find the grants FAQ, which is common questions we've gotten over time. Those are on the website. You'll find our proposal review guidelines are on the website as well. The proposal review guidelines are a super helpful thing if you want to get inside the mind of our grant reviewers. This is the document that they use to ask themselves questions about the application and how well it fits with our grant priorities and how strong of a proposal is. So this is what they use as a basis for their scoring, which is part of the decision-making process. So that's a great way to get sort of inside information on what we're looking for. So try to be as transparent as possible as we can about that. You'll also find that there are many tutorials on the portal usage and so on that are helpful. These examples of evaluation plans, result statements, much like the sample budget and the budget narrative, if you really want to know what we're looking for in those two sections, just look at those sample documents. They're really good examples of what we're expecting to see in those particular sections. Very helpful. Also, the community grants report is really helpful to you from the standpoint of being able to see the kinds of things that we've funded, where those have landed in the various focus areas, and the amounts that we've funded for different kinds of projects. So great resource for you. And of course, this PowerPoint that we're going to send out later is also can be referenced later too. So we'll go to the next slide and talk about eligibility. So some of the pass-fail kinds of things. So to apply, you do need to be either a 501c3 nonprofit, a religious organization, unit of government, or a public university college. And you need to be one for at least a year. So when we're talking about 501c3s, that date comes from your ruling date that's on your IRS determination letter. And then you need to have a year in by the time you would receive the funds, and you would be receiving those funds essentially at the end of November, beginning of December. So, and then when it comes to the religious organizations, the units of government, public universities, colleges, just need to be established for a year. Now, in reality, most of these organizations have been around for way longer than a year. Usually the issue is with the newly formed 501c3. So that's important. But even if you haven't been a business for a year, to participate in this particular presentation, understand what will be required down the road when you are able to apply, I think it's a helpful thing. So the other thing is that we are a community foundation, and our dollars have been donated primarily locally. And so we have an obligation and a restriction really to serve the people of Boone, Ogle, Stevenson, and Winnebago County. So at least 51% of the folks that are being served by a particular program need to come from our service area here. And truly, higher is better as far as that goes. So we are here to serve our specific community as a community foundation. We, as Sarah sort of referenced earlier, we don't fund religious purposes. We do, however, oftentimes fund faith-based organizations. I have update next to it because we're not doing anything different this year as far as that goes, except that in the application we're actually asking you to check off that you are not that the proposal is not for religious purposes, and that you're not requiring participation in religious activities in order to be served through the program. So, and it's also going to be specifically mentioned in the grant agreement. So that's an update. Something that is new, however, is right below it. We are officially saying that we do not fund fundraisers through the Community Foundation's Community Grants Program. And the primary reason for that is that over the last many years, we've had applications for fundraisers, and the committees have very consistently preferred to provide direct services than to support fundraisers. There could be situations where there might be sponsorships that are gotten for very specific sort of events, but not really fundraisers. So our thought is why should you complete an entire application if it's very unlikely that would be funded? So we've just decided no fundraisers going forward. We'll go to the next slide.
James, before we go to the next slide, we
sure.
had a question in the chat. Can we use a fiscal agent that is a 501c3?
That's a great question. Yes, you can. You can absolutely do that. You know, obviously you want to work with that fiscal agent. They may be wanting to apply, and there are some reasons that we can talk about in just a few minutes. That is on another slide coming up that would make it where they might have to make a decision whether they're able to support you in that way. So all of those counties are in fact in Illinois. I just saw the little pop-up. That's a shock. I never see those things, but it happens once in a great while. But we can go to the next slide. It's really important to be current on your reporting to the Community Foundation, specifically for the Community Grants Program. If you, for example, also serve with a neighborhood organization and the organization has an outstanding grant, we're not worried about that so much for the Neighborhood Grants Program. We're really specifically focused on reporting for the Community Grants Program. And we always check that. So important to be that way. If the project that you're working on, so let's say you're being funded for something right now and it's time to apply again, we do understand that a lot of times you're not quite done with that project yet. You still have 14 months to do the program that you're working on, the charitable activity. So if you are not complete yet, you will submit an interim report, and the instructions are included right there on the application for easy reference. And there's so if you're not complete, the interim report is the way to go. However, if you have completed the program, it's a good idea just to go ahead and get that final report in. So either way is acceptable, but we do need to have the update or the final report. And if you are not sure about your status on being up to date on reporting, you can always contact Lisa and she's happy to help you. So we'll take the next slide. Looking at the timeline, so we did open the application on June 14th, and it's important to get on the portal as soon as you can and register yourself if you have not registered. If you've already registered, there is no need to re-register. The submission deadline is going to be at 5 o'clock on Thursday, August 15th, with the awards being made in late November. And like I just mentioned, the funding period is 14 months. So it would be February of 2026, February 1st specifically, of 2026 that your final report would be due. Now, slight exception here is that there are some multi-year grants that we make up to 3 years in the health and education proposal area. So, and those obviously would be a longer period of time. Now, they do have to complete progress reports that are on a similar schedule as the final report. But yeah, that's a little bit about the timeline. We can move to the next slide. I want to talk about this being a competitive process because oftentimes I will get calls from applicants afterward who did not receive funding. And by the way, I do encourage you to call if you would like to get feedback, by all means. And we actually put some feedback in the letters too at this point, but you're welcome to call me about this. But a lot of times I end up having to say, we just didn't have enough money. It was a very competitive process. I know that's the last thing you want to hear as a grant writer. You're always trying to improve. You're trying to see, how do I write a better application so I have a better chance of success? When there are those opportunities for me to give you that constructive criticism, I absolutely am going to go to that first. But don't be surprised if literally the reason you did not get funded is because there were so many good requests and just not enough money. And it just so happened that yours didn't rise to the level that the committee decided to fund it. So, so as you can see by the numbers here, we had almost 4 million in requests last year. We were only able to fund 1.6. So that gives you a sense of how competitive it is. Number-wise, 152 requests down to 82. So it is extremely competitive. But with the extremely competitive process, you need to have a good, thorough way to review, right? So we do have that. We have a 3 sort of layered or tiered approach to it. We have staff review that really is mostly just pass-fail. So looking at those eligibility requirements and being up to date on reporting and those technical kinds of things like that, that's where staff reviews. And you know, sometimes we're able to request information from you. Other times, you know, we don't have time to do that. But there is a staff review process, and then it goes to the major review process. Is really our community committees that review these. And here again, the proposal review guidelines, you can see that on the slide there because there's an inside look to how they're reviewing your application there. So I definitely look at that. And then of course, our board of trustees is the final say and oversight on the grants that we're making. And we can go to the next slide.
James, we have another question from the chat.
Sure.
It is, if we were funded in 2024, are we less likely to receive support for the same program in 2025? What are the stats on support for returning organizations? Yeah,
so absolutely not. You are not less likely to be funded. We often will fund strong programs year after year, although please understand that if you do have a program that's being supported year after year, there's no guarantee that it will continue that way. Unfortunately, we just don't have the funds to guarantee that type of funding. So always know that that could be interrupted, but no, you're not less likely to be funded. Strong programs are strong programs. Our goal is always to fund based on the merits of the proposal that's come in and the difference it will make. And then in terms of what you can do, and this is actually in a slide later, but I'll talk about it now. But if you are doing the interim report for a proposal that you are currently being funded for and you're not done with yet, I would beef it up. You know, give us some of the real outcome information. That will help you a lot. It's actually, in many cases, more compelling to the committees than the application itself, because it's actually what you have done. So that would be a piece of advice I would give you. So fair and objective review. So again, with a competitive process, we just really pride ourselves and try very hard to make sure that we have an objective process, that it's a level playing field for all of our applicants that are all doing amazing work. There's so much that we're unable to fund that we would like to fund every single year. But so to create a fair and objective process, we do use the community. We believe that, as Sarah had mentioned earlier, that it's the community's resources. The community should be the ones saying how the dollars are used. And every single one of these committee members are people drawn from our community. We also have a very strong conflict of interest policy. We don't want anyone to ever feel like the fix is in, right? I know so-and-so, therefore I get a grant. That's not the way we do things. So to ensure that, we have a multi-layered conflict of interest policy. The first being that all of our reviewers at the very beginning of the year have to complete a form. That form will list every single potential organization they may have a conflict with. Either they're on the board of directors, or maybe they're involved in some other way that's very closely or fiduciary type of relationship with that particular organization. So there's that. Then in the actual committee meeting, at the beginning of the committee meeting, they're asked to declare any conflicts of interest they have with that particular, or with any particular organizations being reviewed. If they do, that's of course noted in the minutes, but then they are asked to leave the room when conversation turns to that particular organization. So there's that piece of it. And then of course they are asked to recuse themselves in terms of voting. So they do not vote on those particular proposals. So, and of course, these folks that we're working with, they're involved in the community. So we're going to have conflicts. So we have to have a process to work with that. So the other thing we do is we don't publish the names of the folks that are on our committees. We don't want there to be any sort of lobbying or really any pressure on those folks. They're doing a good deed in doing this process. And really, all communication should come through the grants office. So another way we try to be as fair as possible is we try to really only give the same advice to applicants that we would give to any other applicant. So it's the same advice to all. We do entertain your technical questions that you have on applications. What we can't do is get really into specifics of what will make your proposal better than, say, another applicant's proposal that we would not say to someone else. We can go to the next slide. So what are some tips with the application? So all applications must be submitted online. That's old news now, but we still need to say it. It's true. And one thing that is another new thing for this year is that you may recall that last year we sort of structured the application into 3 different tiers based on request amount. And the requests that were less had less complicated application, more streamlined. And then the ones in the middle were more of a medium-sized application, so to speak. And then we asked for more information when it was over $50,000. So we've always said the greater the scrutiny, or the greater the ask, the greater the scrutiny with our grant making. We have raised the lower threshold on our applications. So 10,000 now instead of 5,000 will get the streamlined application. So hopefully that'll help a lot of folks as they're applying. We talked about applying for currently funded programs. And Sarah talked a lot about the focus areas. All I will do is reiterate that don't stress. Don't stress, even though we tried to clarify the focus areas a little bit, really don't worry about it. Put it in the one that you think makes the most sense. If we feel like it has a better shot in a different committee, we're going to move it there for you so you have the best chance possible. So just choose one. A little update to the school pre-authorization form. Now, you may remember that if you are working with a school, particularly on site with them, or recruiting students from schools, that you need to have a pre-authorization form from that school. And then the update really is that we're really including field trips in this as well. In some ways, you might think that the field trips wouldn't be included because it's just a service that you have available that they can take advantage if they'd like to. Well, there's two fronts really here that it makes sense for the school authorization form to be completed. And one is that we've heard from our school friends that they have a number of hoops to jump through in order to be able to allow students to be able to go to these field trips and things. So the earlier they can get on that, the better. And then also from our perspective, we want to make sure that the schools actually see this as a need, that what you're providing will be something that has a market, so to speak. So from both of those perspectives, that's a good thing to do and a requirement. And just a note about attachments. We do have various places for attachments throughout the application, and there's usually two restrictions on that. One is on the file type, and then one is on the file size. So as it regards the file type, if it doesn't say anything, it's a PDF that we're requiring. Most of them will say that right on the application, right in the question that's being asked. But if it doesn't say it, it's a PDF. Now, there are a few that will say right there that, it can be a JPEG or some other kind of picture file because it is a picture. So, but pay attention to that because that will throw an error for your application if you do that. Now, the other limitation is file size. Now, the file size is important because we apparently have an overall file size limit for all attachments on the application. So we have to be sort of judicious about what we allow in each one of the questions. Now, that is on, the file limit is on, or the size limit is on every single field or question that is an upload field. So it's right there for you. We'll go to the next slide for a few more application tips. Here is something that relates to what I talked about earlier. So there is a 3 application limit per organization, and that's where a fiscal agent might shy away from working with you if they already are doing 3 applications, because your application would then count as one of those 3. The good news is so many organizations do not take advantage of the full 3 application limit. They'll maybe be doing 1 or 2 in a given year, but that is an important consideration for them and for you to talk with them about. And when I say 3 applications, they need to be 3 unique applications. So it's not like you could have the same program and maybe one of them you put under youth and families and maybe the other one's going through, I don't know, basic needs or whatever. They need to be distinct charitable activities that you're applying for. And another note about that is when it's, this rule applies when you have an organization and their foundation with both of those entities, although they are separate and have separate EINs, we look at them as the same when it comes to applying for community grants. That way, it feels way more fair. So like an organization like Rock Valley College, for an example, absolutely has a foundation and they have their public university, right? So they could technically, from that standpoint, take 6 bites at the apple. That doesn't feel fair to us. To most organizations, right, that don't have a standalone foundation, that would only get 3 bites at the apple, so to speak. So that is the rule that we follow on that for the fairness purpose there. And just a note that with the interim report that I talked about earlier, there is a special section on the application that's very convenient for you to be able to upload that interim report. It also, if you say yes to having a currently funded program, you won't be able to go any further unless you do upload that. So it's sort of a safety check on you to be able to get that interim report in and make that easier to do. So we'll go to the next slide and talk about the various support types that we have. Now, the support types are important because much like the request size, well, let me step back just a second. I should have mentioned earlier that our application is based on branching logic. So you would answer certain questions and therefore other questions would come up based on that branching logic. And one example of that, well, one example was the request size we talked about earlier, how it makes the application either really streamlined, moderately streamlined, or a little larger, right? The other one that is important is the support type. So each one of these will populate different questions that are more appropriate to that particular support type. So when we talk about an event, that's something that takes place in less than a week. You know, a project would be something that has definitely a start and an end date defined, but likely does not recur. A program in many ways is similar to a project, but typically these are ongoing and you do them every year or twice a year or however often. But it's something that you continue to do, and there really is no end date per se. The next one is the capital commodity, and this one is a little bit more complicated, and we'll have a whole slide that we talk about here for this one. So with the capital commodity, we sort of invented this one because there were certain things that didn't seem to fit as well as into like our evaluation plan or some of the other questions that we might ask, like if you're providing direct service. Well, if you're buying a machine, it's not necessarily about direct service at that particular point. So we have what we call capital, which is not for general capital campaigns, like large campaigns where you're building a building or something like that. These are for smaller ones that are more self-contained, that we are able to do a good share of it. So the primary purpose of things like maybe equipment purchase or remodeling projects, something like that. We've done an awful lot of bathrooms that were remodeled for ADA compliance. Obviously very important, not super exciting sounding, but they are important, right? Vans, we've purchased a number of vans, furnishing a specific area of a facility that's being built, that we can do. So parts of an overall project we can help with. The commodity idea is just more or less whenever you are purchasing a number of items and then you're then distributing those items for the good of people. So there's really no program around it. And a good example of this might be, say, backpacks for kids at the beginning of the school year. They need backpacks, but how are you going to track those folks down and get any sort of outcome information? You're not going to be able to, right? We can assume that if they have a backpack, they're going to have a better start at school. So the evaluation plan is going to look a little different for the capital commodity request type, and that's our support type. And that's why we have them broke out that way. So we'll move on to the next question, or the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about the budget. The budget is an important part of the proposal. I mean, clearly it tells us how you're using the money and how you're funding the rest of the proposal, especially if we're not funding at all. So it's important from that standpoint, but it's also important because many of our reviewers will use this as sort of a Cliff Notes version of your application. A lot of them, they will go directly to the application to see how the dollars are actually being used. So I would encourage you to take your time with the budget. I would encourage you to involve your finance person, or if there's someone on your board that has a financial background, I would encourage you to involve them. But as I mentioned before, we do have the sample budget and the sample budget narrative. I would highly encourage you to review those as you're doing your application here. So, but let's talk about a few tips about the budget here. It's important to understand that everything that you put into this budget is specific to this proposal, this particular charitable activity. It's not for your overall organization. That's important. If you look at the little yellow that we have highlighted here, you'll see that's the status column. That lets us know, and let me back up. We're looking at the revenue side of things right now. We're going to take a look at the expense side of things here in just a minute. So, but on the side of the revenue, you're going to give us the status of that particular revenue source. So like in our case, it's requested, right? You've just put in the application. You don't know if you're getting the grant or not, so it's requested. But it could also be pledged, which means they've told you that you're going to get the dollars, you just don't have them yet. It could be received, which obviously is the best, you know, for you, the best revenue source is that you have it in hand. So that's always great. And then you could also have something that's estimated. And a lot of times that would be from earned income. Say you're able to charge a certain amount for, in this case, you can see the tutoring fees, right? So maybe normally the tutoring fees would be like $50 an hour, and you're able to, you know, charge them $5. That way they have some investment in it, but it also helps support the program to some extent. So that would be estimated expenses. And I would also say that always make sure that your revenue always exceeds or equals the expenses. Now, why would it exceed it? Well, it might exceed it if you have a number of revenue sources that are requested as opposed to being received. You don't necessarily know if you're getting those. We like to know that you have a plan, though, to find the rest of those dollars so we can see that you have those in your revenue list. So that's why it could be more, but it certainly should be at least equal. We'll go to the next slide and take a look at the, oh, I guess I'm going to make sure I said everything I was supposed to say, and I believe I did. So when we're looking at expenses here, the expense side of the budget, we have, and I didn't mention this actually, but it's on both sides. The blue is the indirect expense. As Sarah said, we encourage you to take your 15% for your overhead costs that are essential for you to be able to do these charitable activities. We believe it's our responsibility to pay our fair share, and that's what that's about. So please do that. And then the pink here is an example of an in-kind expense. Now, an in-kind expense would be something that's either donated to you or it's like volunteer time. So in this particular case, we're talking about classroom rental where you could have been charged for those rooms, but you were not. That's a true resource and it's a true expense. And you'll see that it's on both sides of the budget. So it'd be on the revenue side and on the expense side. So it's important to have it on both sides. It'll be a wash as far as that goes, dollar-wise, but it shows us that, hey, people value your program enough that they're willing to give up, you know, their classrooms in this particular case, or it could be volunteer time. They're willing to give up their time to help you. They must believe in what you're doing. So it does show support. So that's why we encourage you to do that. The yellow is an example of when, you know, we only have 13 lines here, and you may have way more expenses than that. So when that's the case, we ask you to group those expenses into common like areas. In this particular case, we're looking at flyers and social media. So those are similar marketing types of pieces, and they're grouped together. Now, you likely would explain it a little bit more in your budget narrative, but yeah, you can group it right there. And so again, there's just another shout out to the sample budget and budget narrative. Don't forget that. Please, please, please look at it. If your budget looks similar to what we've got, you're probably in pretty good shape. We'll go to the next slide, make sure I didn't miss anything. I believe we're in good shape there. So we do want to talk about quotes. Quotes are important. The committee likes to see that you've done your due diligence in terms of finding not always just the cheapest source, but a competitive source. There are times that maybe it's not the cheapest for different reasons, but that you've done the due diligence to find the right provider for whatever it is, whether it's an item or whether it's a contractor or something along those lines. But 2 quotes are going to be needed if you have a line item that's over 5,000. So this can include things like remodeling projects. Usually you get a quote from the contractor on that. Consultant fees, we would want to see that you had 2 quotes on that. Different things like that. So anytime it's over 5,000, we're going to want a couple of quotes. Now, that doesn't mean that if it's under 5,000, you never want to include a quote. We're not requiring you to, but there are times that if you show how you know that things are going to cost a certain amount by having quotes, that can be helpful too. So that's up to your discretion when you think it makes sense to do that. And this also matters, let's go back to the backpack example. If you're buying enough backpacks that it's over 5,000, we are going to want to see the quote on the one backpack so we can see how you arrived at that 5,000 number. And a lot of times that is detailed in the budget narrative. So there are situations, however, we recognize where it doesn't make sense to have a second quote. So let's say you're an organization like Habitat for Humanity, and you have this particular contractor that always provides this particular service to you and does it at such a cut rate that it's ridiculously lower than others. And you've been working with them for years. It seems sort of disingenuous for you to go out and get a fake quote almost. It's almost fake. It's not really fake. The quote's not fake, but it's redundant, right? You're not going to take that quote because you've got organization A that's always done this for you at a great rate, and reward them for doing that, right? So that would be a situation where that would be the case. If that is the case, we do want you to upload something in place of the quote that is a letter of support from that contractor or that provider that indicates that they are providing it on a cut rate, and that you wouldn't be doing that. There are some other times where it just doesn't make sense. You can't get another quote. For an example, let's say you have a specific computer or software platform, and you need a new module for that to be able to expand your services in some fashion. Well, you can't just run out and get any module. You have to get the one that corresponds to the software that you're using. So that would be a situation where you would need to explain that in the budget narrative. But we do understand that those situations do come up. So we will go on to the next slide. We have all kinds of questions popping up. Are you guys answering those on the side, or do I need to address any?
You're good for now.
Okay.
Thanks, James. We'll go to the next slide.
Just a chatty bunch today. That's wonderful. Yes, so. Yep, I think we covered all that. We'll go to the next slide.
Sorry. Yep,
nope, you're fine.
There we go.
No worries. So let's talk a little bit about indirect expenses. We've already talked some about indirect expenses, right? We've encouraged you to take your 15%. Essentially, the indirect expenses are those things that are important to be able to run your organization, but can't easily be allocated to this particular charitable activity. We'll go to the next slide and take a look at some examples. And you really don't need to know what indirect expenses are. We're not going to ask you to outline which indirect expenses our 15% is going to cover. We just want you to say indirect expense, 15%. But knowing what direct expenses are can be helpful. Those are the things that are going to go right into your budget, right? So the rent for the portion of the building that you're currently using for that charitable activity, the salary of the people that are dedicated to that particular charitable activity, or the percentage of time that they are dedicated to that particular charitable activity, and so on. So you guys see the other examples there. So those would be direct expenses. And we'll go to the next slide and talk about some other resources that we have. So we understand that the budgeting piece and the evaluation piece oftentimes can be more difficult for a lot of applicants. And really, different funders may ask for different things. And because we know that, we provide some workshops, hands-on workshops that will hopefully assist you with that. These are in person at the Community Foundation. We found that it works way better to do these in person than to do them via Zoom because it's much more informal and we get questions answered right on the spot that way. You can see we have 3 different times that you could sign up, and those are on our Community Grants webpage, and we do encourage you to sign up for those. We'll move to the next slide here and talk about the new sort of opportunity you have. Last year we did this and it worked really well. And we call these work sessions, and it's where you can come hang out with Lisa and I, and you can ask any questions you have as you're working on your application. So it can be very practical from that standpoint. This year we're organizing 2 sessions, but they'll technically, I guess it's 3 sessions, right? Because we're going to do it in time slots. So on August 1st, you could come at either 10 or 9, 10, or 11, and you sign up for one of those slots. And then on Tuesday, it's the 6th, it's similar. We're doing that because we felt like we couldn't get around to everyone and answer all the questions when we just had it open for that entire 3-hour period. So we'll go to the next slide and talk about our grantee orientation. So we do ask you, if you have not been funded in the last couple of years, to come to our grantee orientation, where we're able to talk about the reporting requirements and the publicity requirements that you have when you receive a grant from the Community Foundation. So if you have received a grant recently, you certainly are welcome to come. We encourage anyone to come to get a refresher. There are sometimes some new things that we bring out there, but a refresher never hurts. We're going to hold these during the week of January 13th. There'll be multiple sessions that are just the same, so you don't need to sign up for multiple sessions. Each of them are the same. So we'll move on to the next slide, which is Lisa's turn to talk about the application itself. So Lisa, take it away.
Yes, hi, I'm Lisa DeLang. I'm the Program and Administrative Associate here at the Foundation. And if you don't know me, get to know me, because I'm your first line person that you're going to call if you have any issues with the application. And I'm always happy to help. I know you've gotten a lot of information today, and there's a lot of information on our website. You can see all these places you can go to get help and get the reports and get everything. And if you start to feel overwhelmed, please just reach out and call me. one of the things that I hate to see is when somebody starts an application and then they don't finish it. I always hope it's because maybe they realized they weren't eligible or whatever, but I hope it's not because you felt like you couldn't do it. You can absolutely write an application for us. So just all these arrows are pointing to places where you can get info. The resources arrow is where you're going to find the information for grant seekers. That's where the bulk of info is going to be. And that apply for grant one in the upper right-hand corner is where you're going to go to start the application. And this is our CFNIL basic landing page, but you're going to go to the apply for grant, and it's going to take you here to our portal registration. If you already have an account, you could just log in. Please, please, please don't make another account. It makes things really messy for us and can cause problems if you do get awarded and getting your checkout to the right organization. So if you don't know if you have an account, give me a call. I'll let you know. And if you need to change information on an account or add users, please call me. You can't add users yourself just to your main page. But if you call me or you email me, then I can do that for you. If you need to start a account, you can create a new account. And remember that the email address that's in there is case sensitive. So enter that the way that you're always going to enter it, and that the way your email is just basically is, because that's where all the communication is going to go through. And make sure you get started early. I have every year people start like a couple days before, and you could do that. And if you have an issue, I will answer the phone at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night, but I prefer not to do that. Just get it started early. So if you run into an issue, then I can help you early. And we can go to the next slide. This is just what you're going to have to fill in when you start a new account. And it's important to get this right because you cannot change this once you've turned it in. You'll have to get a hold of me and I'll have to change it for you, which is fine. But just be careful about that when you're entering the information here. Okay, and one of the things that you want to remember is that you're going to start with one user and then you can call me to add new users on. So this is your applicant dashboard. The person who is going to be the primary contact for the application should be the person who starts the application, and you can add people through a collaborator feature to work on that specific application that we'll talk about a little bit later. This page is where you're going to be able to apply. You're going to be able to see any requests that you have in. So if you have any final reports due, any progress reports due, all this will be on this page. And then you'll be able to see your historical requests that you've had. So you've already turned in the reports, but you want to see what you wrote last year, a couple of years before. You can see that in that historical request section. And then there's also that organizational history where if you didn't write the request, but you want to see what somebody else wrote a couple of years ago, or maybe you've had some turnover and you've been assigned a final report and you want to see what the application was about, you could see that in the organization history. And we talked about that right there. We do have a lot of videos and instruction and links in the application itself. So if you're in the application, you have a question, you can just click on that link and be able to get information on how to use the collaborator or how you apply for funding. They're really helpful. I would suggest everybody watch these if you haven't done it before. We have this preview feature over here, and that will allow you to get into the application, see what the questions are. Our application is a branching application, so based how you answer a question, you may get a different question or additional questions. So you can kind of test and see what kind of questions you'll get. That section does not save. So I usually suggest people just jump right into the application. You can always change your answers, even after you've submitted it. If you decide you need to go back and change an answer, you can call me and I'll revert you back into a draft. But the preview, I just would hate for anybody to do a bunch of work and then realize that they were in preview mode and none of that work is going to save. The application itself, though, auto-save. There is a save button at the bottom. We only have that in there because we would get a lot of calls about people who were worried about their work saving. It'll alert you to fields you still need to do, but the application will auto-save, so you don't need to worry about that. Okay, I think I got all of that. Yep. These are some of our application features. There is the copy previous answers. This is going to be especially helpful if you are applying for the same program that you have applied for before. It's going to pull similar answers into your new application, and you can edit them, and you should edit them to update information that will be in there. But it'll save you a ton of time if you're doing that. And then our collaborate feature is really important. It will allow you to add people who you're working with for this application. So let's say you have a finance person that's going to fill out all of the financial information, or there is a different person who knows more about the program itself because they're running the program, or you might just want to have somebody look over this application for you. You can add them with the collaborator feature, and you could set permissions for them. So you can have it so they can just view, they can edit, or they can even submit. But that is the place to do that, and it's very, very helpful. There is the question list that's circled there. This will just give you all of the questions that is on our application. So if you want to just get in there and see a brief overview of all of the questions you might have, you could do that with the question list. And this applicant is going to be the primary person who applies. Again, we want the person who is going to be our primary contact to be the one who starts the application. That's what information will show up to us and who will contact if we have questions. We use Dropbox to get pictures and media from you. They're really important to the reviewers. If you have any pictures before and after of a remodel that you want us to do, or I guess it would just be the before, after would be when you submit your final report, any pictures from your program, anything like that, those things are really meaningful to our reviewers to be able to see what you're doing. We do really want you to use our format here that we have circled, because we had 152 applications last year, and everybody's putting them into the same Dropbox. And I just need to know how to label them, if they're, or what bucket to put them into. And if they're not labeled, it's going to be really difficult for me to find out where they came from. So you're going to access that there. And then sometimes you have sensitive pictures that you're sharing that are going to be helpful for the reviewer, but you don't want them to be used for our marketing purposes or on Facebook or in our grants catalog. All you need to do is put "do not use" on that in part of the title, and we will not use that. But it might be important that you have that in there for our reviewers to see. This is just an example of that formatting we want you to use. It's in the application itself, so you could see it. I think I covered all of that. And that's it for me. I'm going to send you to Sarah, and she's going to talk to you about our fun new question. But again, I just want to say thank you for coming here, and please contact me if you have any issues when you're getting into your application.
All right, yes, so just wanted to highlight one question that we have added this year. Again, experienced reviewers know that we like to send surveys, we like to get feedback. So this time we're actually forcing you to respond, because this is built into the application instead of a separate form. We are looking at ways that we can help support the nonprofit sector outside of traditional grant making. So we're not talking about operating dollars or anything like this, we're talking about other services. So we'd like to know if any of these are of interest to you, specifically pass-through agency funds, which means that you could access the entire amount at any time. Semi-liquid agency funds, meaning that you can access the performance but not the principal. Fiscal agency services, a crowdfunding platform might be an option in the future. Back office support. Do you need like 1/3 of a marketing person and half of an HR person? technical training opportunities, and co-located work and collaboration spaces, or anything else that might pop into your mind that we could offer. We'd like to hear about it. All right, so very quickly before we get to the Q&A, just want to mention a couple other opportunities we have in the future. First is in Youth We Trust. That's our philanthropy group for local high school students. We're looking for new members right now. They just have to be enrolled in a high school in the Fort County area. We also will be looking for applicants to the grant program in both the fall and the spring. If you work with groups of youth, it's a great opportunity. Neighborhood grants, those will open up next year. Those are for smaller local neighbor-driven programs, and they don't necessarily have to be submitted by a 501c3. The Excalibur and Excelsior Awards, the application or the nomination form will open up on August 15th and close on October 1st. So if you have any super volunteers, long-term board members, people who really make a difference in the community, let us know, tell us about them, and submit an application through our online portal. And then the celebration will happen, I believe it's December 12th, the second Thursday in December. We throw a big party and we want you to come, so keep that on your calendar. We also have mini grants for teachers and classroom grants. This is one we've been running for a while, but we will actually be expanding it this year. We don't have details to share yet, but there will be additional opportunities for teachers to engage in different types of professional development. So keep an eye out for that around Thanksgiving. We also have our scholarship program. Those applications will open on November 1st, December 1st, and March 1st. The December 1st application is the primary one. That's where the vast majority of our scholarships will be. We will also host our annual scholarship fair the first Tuesday in December. And that's where all the scholarship providers come together and students can talk to them expo style. There will also be presentations from ISAC about financial aid and about our application and things like that. So if you're a scholarship provider, let us know. We'd love to have you there. And then our most fun party, the nonprofit happy hour, which is something that we've done for the last couple of years, where we throw a big party where the theme is no work, all play. So come and hang out in our backyard, bring your staff with you. And this year it'll be carnival themed. So there will be games and other fun things, eat some snacks, hang out, talk to people that you work with every day, but don't actually, know anything about them outside of the office. This is a great opportunity for that. And then volunteers. We're always looking for more volunteers, particularly in our scholarship program. It's been going gangbusters lately, and so we need some more people to review applications. So if you're interested in a short-term, fairly intense, but short-term volunteer opportunity, you can hit that QR code or go to our website and learn more about what it means to be involved with that process. All right, Q&A, any questions?
So we had a couple of questions in chat that I took note of that I wanted to answer really quickly here. One question was about your length of service, your eligibility length of service. If you've been in business for a year, but you haven't served within our 4 counties for more than a year, does that disqualify you? It does not. As long as you've been an organization for more than a year, you can apply if you're expanding into our service area. I will say that it is very likely that the committee may put more scrutiny to be sure that you are aware of and or working with other entities that are doing your same kind of work in our service area, but it's not a disqualification if you haven't served here before. Another question was about how much should we apply for? We've given you lots of numbers. We've talked about a tiered application. How much should you apply for? We can't answer that question for you. The range, the average award, the ranges of the awards are provided as guidelines and benchmarks for you to make an informed decision, but really it's up to you. What do you need for your program? We intentionally do not provide a minimum or a maximum, but we like to give you a sense of what committees are likely to award for the types of programs in those focus areas. So I can't give you a specific answer to that. Yeah. James, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add something to that. One general tip I can give you in terms of the amount to apply for is if you're brand new to the Community Foundation, probably your first application is not when you reach for the stars. I would get under the $10,000 mark first. The committees, you know, with as many cuts as they need to make, right? They go to organizations that they have a funding relationship, that they've seen good work that they've done over and over again. So better to come in at a smaller amount that might be seen as less risky, less of an investment, and start there with your funding relationship.
And the tiered application, it just refers to like sort of the length of the application. James made the statement that higher ask results in higher scrutiny, and that's the case. That's reflected in the length, the depth of the application. So you don't have to make all of those decisions ahead of time, right? You don't need to know what all the questions are ahead of time. Come in with a reasonable, like, what is your request? What are you asking for? And the application will right size itself based on that, what your ask is. The workshop dates, the dates are correct. The days that we listed were wrong. We had to change those a few times, so I apologize about that. But the dates that are listed are correct, the dates and times. Let's see. If you submit a grant, if you submit a grant for an emergency shelter that serves survivors of domestic and sexual violence, which focus area would it fall under?
I believe equity, dignity, and respect would probably be the correct category, because you're really working with that vulnerable population. It could also potentially be basic needs, but you'd really want to look at the purpose of the program. So what are your outcomes? What are you measuring? And then how does that correspond to the criteria within the focus area itself?
Right.
So and really looking at that, like, so what am I trying to do? That's really where it connects to your focus area.
Yes.
Any other questions? And feel free to pop off and, hop off mute if you'd prefer.
Okay.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. By us, I mean Lisa, anytime you would like. She's always happy to help. I sometimes tell her that she's weird because she loves grant season so much. So give her something to do. She would love to talk to you. But again, James and I are always available. If you're interested in volunteering, you can also talk to Heather. She runs our scholarship program as well as the Youth We Trust. We appreciate all the work that you're going to put into this process. We literally can't do our job without you. So thank you so much and enjoy the muggy day.